Soybean fertility. It's one thing that actually most farmers don't even pay any attention to, because usually when there's corn stalks out there and they're going to go to soybeans, they just say, well, I fertilized enough on my corn, so I've got enough left over the next year for soybeans. Guess what? You probably don't.
With soybeans, a lot of guys have been saying, man, I'm disappointed in my soybean yields.
Yep.
They aren't going up like my corn yields. And the first question I generally ask is, well, tell me about your fertility program. And in most cases, it's, well, I'm putting this on my corn, and I'm counting on some carryover in my beans. So I'm either putting nothing on in the beans, or I'm just putting a small amount on. Maybe I'm spending 20 bucks or 40 bucks on my bean crop. And guess what? It's just not enough, especially with the corn yields that we're getting on the other side of the program.
Yeah, but let's talk about why. On our farm this fall, we spent $125 an acre to put out enough P and K to raise 70 bushel beans next year. So our yield goal is 70. We just fertilized with what the crop is going to remove. It cost about 125 bucks. That is a lot of money, and I got to tell you, there's no way that that's going to pay. I mean, if you're, well, seriously, in 1 year, next year, we aren't going to have, well, we might have $15 beans, I don't know, but if
well,
we did,
it
might pay. But I think we're only going to gain 5 to 8 bushels on this. Well, let's say that we gain 8 bushels times $8, that's 64 bucks. And we spent 125. You know, that math only works out good for the fertilizer dealer. It does not work out good for us.
I tell you what,
in the short term.
It really does work out in the long term, though, because you have to look at whatever crop you're raising. It doesn't matter which crop it is. All of them, what the job of a crop is to pull plant nutrients out of the soil. I mean, they've got to eat, and then they produce seed that you haul away. Now, you may be hauling the whole plant away, like in the case of silage, or you may be hauling just the seed away. Either way, you're pulling lots of nutrient-rich crop out of that field. You've got to replace those nutrients at least that you're taking away. Otherwise, what happens over time is your fertilizer depletes in soil fertility. So every year your yield potential goes down, goes down, goes down, goes down. And yeah, Brian, if you want to run that soil fertility down for 5 years, all of a sudden your return on investment for fertilizer is going to be great.
Yep, and that's the whole thing. So if you're only looking at a 1-year return on investment with fertilizer, you're probably not looking at it right. And that's the trouble if you're renting ground. It's really hard. How do you do it? Like here in this ground that we're in right now, we own this ground. I'm really not too worried about it. If we get too much P and K out here, eventually I'm going to recover that. Eventually I'm going to raise enough crop that I'm going to get my money back and then some. But if you're only going to have that ground for 1 year, it's really hard to do it.
Well, with fertility and soybeans, there's a few things that we really want you to take a look at. And just for an example, let's say that you're raising 60 bushel soybeans. I'm not too concerned about how much nitrogen soybeans are taking out of the ground, because they are a legume crop. They are going to put some more nitrogen back into the ground, and that's all fine. The important thing is just make sure you're putting inoculant on your beans. That helps with more rhizobia bacteria, more nodulation, and it gives the soybean plant a better opportunity to produce more nitrogen. The nutrients that I'm really concerned about start with phosphorus and potassium.
Well, with phosphorus, a 60 bushel soybean crop, just with the grain, is going to remove roughly 48 pounds of actual P and about 84 pounds of actual K. So again, this is a 60 bushel crop. If you get a 40 bushel crop, just figure 2/3 of that. If you get a 30 bushel crop, figure half of that. Or let's say you get a 90 bushel crop, just multiply that number by 1.5. The point is the ratio is still basically the same regardless of what your yield is. You just have to understand that the grain takes away a lot of nutrients. That soybean seed is very rich in nutrients, and the one that always has surprised me is the potassium. I just didn't realize how much potassium soybeans take away from a field. So a lot of times when guys have great yielding soybeans, the next year they have corn that maybe has a little thinner stalk, doesn't stand as well, and they say, oh boy, what's the problem out here? Well, the problem is they didn't fertilize their soybeans the year before, the beans pulled out all kinds of K, and they just didn't replace that.
Well, the other thing is, in a corn-soybean rotation, corn has about 145 pounds of K in the stalks. And if you're in a field like this where you've got all this heavy residue and you don't get a whole lot of late season rains to flush that potassium out of the stalks, you may have an issue where all the potassium's out of the top 6 inches of ground and it's all sitting on top in these stalks. Perhaps you do some tillage to work some of that down into the soil profile, or you need to apply K for sure to make sure you've got enough for the beans.
Okay, when we talk about soybean fertility, we can't forget the micronutrients. Just like in corn or wheat or any crop, we don't need a lot of micronutrients to raise tremendous amounts of yield, but we need just a little bit. And if you're short on that just a little bit, guess what? You have lower yield. You can probably put out all the micronutrients you need for your farm for a 60 bushel soybean crop for $5 or $10 an acre. It doesn't cost much. So if you're doing everything else, spending all the money on your cash rent and your equipment and your seed and your chemical fertilizer, everything else you're doing, don't forget about that $5 or $10 worth of micronutrients.
So if you're looking for the key to raising higher yielding soybeans on your farm, start with the fertility program. One other thing that you may do to raise better soybeans is do a better job controlling weeds like our Weed of the Week. It's coming up next.